The best possible advice is to avoid travel into Mexico if at all possible. You basically are playing with fire if you, as an American citizen, go into Mexico. That's not to say that it's going to happen every time, but the problem is that, it can happen when least expected.
Has a night off. We begin tonight with a search for 4 Americans who were kidnapped just after crossing the border.
The FBI now offering a $50,000 reward for their return and the arrest of the culprits.
Video from the active scene as investigators were doing everything they could searching to find these kidnapped Americans.
Sitting on the right side of the Rio Grande River is the Texas border town of Laredo, a smaller-sized metropolitan but one of the largest border cities in the country. Laredo is just across the Grande River from Nuevo Laredo, a border town in Mexico and home to a sprawling cartel operation involved in drugs, human smuggling, and weapons trafficking across the well-secured U.S. border crossings at Juarez-Lincoln, Convent Avenue, Columbia Solidarity Station, the World Trade Bridge, and the gateway to the Americas Bridge.
The sounds of gunfire piercing the night in Nuevo Laredo. Gang members paralyzing traffic with spike strips. Charred tractor trailers lining the highway.
You saw some of the destruction of 18-wheelers, vehicles along the pathway.
Congressman Henry Cuellar from Laredo, Texas, says the violence was sparked over a high-profile cartel arrest.
One group is not happy because they caught their leader. The other 2 are saying, is there a vacuum in here? Maybe we need to come in. So there might be fights over Plaza because of what happened, capturing that high-ranking individual.
The man arrested, one of Border Patrol's most wanted criminals, Juan Gerardo Trevino, also known as El Huevo. He's the leader of the Cartel of the Northeast, with a long rap sheet. His arrest, a powerful blow to that gang's power in the area. Now, 2 other cartels are vying for their business. 3 gangs taking to the streets, firing at Mexican troops and each other, shutting down the U.S. consulate and 2 international bridges in the process.
Laredo's proximity to Mexico has allowed for Texas to become a major cartel operations hub over the past few decades, turning southern Texas into a pickup and drop-off point for drug smugglers, weapons dealers, kidnappers, and murderers who've used the region for all kinds of illegal operations. But it's not just Laredo. Southern Texas is a vast, sparsely populated region comprising a number of cities and towns south of San Antonio. It's gotten to a point where police busts worth millions of dollars in drug seizures have become the norm, while the region's younger population has become at risk to cartel employment as a way to get quick cash while still in school. Between 2024 and 2025, there was a reported uptick in teenage arrests for involvement in cartel drug and human smuggling schemes, arrests that oftentimes ended in violence and car crashes. 2025 so far has been a major year for the Department of Justice's fight against cartel operations in Texas, but that isn't dispelling the violence from taking place. In February of 2025, Antonio Cespedes Saldierna, an elderly Texas rancher who owned land in Tamaulipas, Mexico, had left his farm in Brownsville, Texas to tend to his property across the border, but was blown up by a cartel-planted IED. Another passenger in his car was blown up as well, while the passenger's wife narrowly survived. IEDs planted across roads and fields are a known tactic of the border cartels, and IED explosions and drone rocket strikes became a norm in Mexico in the 2020s. Between 2023 and 2025, thousands of IEDs have been seized not just in Mexico, but in the US on their way down south. Earlier in February, a cross-border shootout took place in Fronton, Texas, when a drone captured cartel gunmen standing across the Rio Grande River firing on US border authorities, who fired back as their aggressors fled for backup. In early June of 2025, authorities in the Mexican border city of Reynosa discovered 5 burnt bodies in a field outside the city. The bodies were those of the Grupo Fugitivo, a narco-corrido band whose 4 musicians and manager had all been reported missing a week earlier while driving to a venue in the Mexican state of Tamaulipas. Violence in Tamaulipas isn't a new phenomenon, and in 2023, the United States would receive a rude wake-up call to just how bad things had become on one of the world's largest and most commercialized borders.
A Senate hearing highlighting the dangers of unaccompanied children at the border. 4 people now charged in a very disturbing case, accused of pretending to be parents and sedating children with marijuana gummies. Brooke Taylor is following this bizarre story. She's in Dallas for us. Brooke?
Well, in this case, the smugglers went right through the Border Patrol checkpoints, pretended to be the parents, and also sedated the children. 2 U.S. citizens here and 2 Mexican nationals who are still wanted are charged right now in this smuggling scheme. The smugglers are accused of using gummies laced with marijuana to sedate these children. And in at least one case, a child was sent to the hospital.
Violence against Americans in Mexico's border states is not necessarily uncommon. In 2021, over 200 Americans were reported dead in Mexico, over a third of those deaths being ruled as homicides. In the past few years, stories have come out of resort cities of American tourists going off-route and being kidnapped, held for ransom, or murdered with no motive. In December of 2022, Cincinnati, Ohio architect and a Mexican-born American, Jose Gutierrez, traveled down to Mexico to visit his fiancée, Danielle Pichardo, planning their wedding for 2023 when the two were ambushed in central Mexico by gunmen who sprayed their car, kidnapped them, and murdered them. Their bodies were found in January, buried in a field alongside 2 of Pichardo's family members. That same month, 33-year-old California public defender Elliot Blair was found dead at a resort in Rosarito Beach, there to celebrate his anniversary. Numerous stories came out around the time of his death, the first being that he'd taken a drunken fall from his hotel room balcony, while the autopsy report was more in line with his story of Blair being brutally beaten until his head fractured before being dumped off the balcony by his supposed attackers.
An American college student confirmed dead and 2 others injured in the Mexican nightclub shooting. Officials say that Alejandro Villanueva was trampled to death when gunfire broke out at a music festival in Playa del Carmen. Well, her friend, who was shot in both hands, speaking out about the horror for the very first time.
However, for the most part, most Americans entering Mexico for travel, commerce, medical reasons, or business encounter no issues in the neighboring country, with over 50,000 vehicles crossing the border at the El Paso crossing alone every single day, making the US-Mexico border one of the busiest in the world, and making Mexico one of the most popular vacation spots for Americans who want to escape the cold up north or want to soak up the sun and get a few drinks on the beach. Only certain Mexican states have actual travel advisories or warnings issued in America to dispel travelers from entering them, including the state of Tamaulipas. Tamaulipas is home to the Mexican border city of Matamoros, across the border from Brownsville, Texas. For the longest time, Tamaulipas had a severe level 4 do not travel advisory in the United States due to the presence of the Gulf Cartel. The cartel had started as the Cartel de Matamoros in the Prohibition era, almost a century ago, by whiskey smuggler Juan Nepomuceno Guerra. Guerra held a strong grasp over illicit business across the Rio Grande, while his nephew, a car thief named Juan Garcia Abrego, would use the cartel's power to move marijuana and then cocaine into Texas across the 1970s and 1980s. By 1994, the Gulf Cartel was estimated at being worth some $10 billion in profit and assets. The cartel violence across Tamaulipas had been ongoing for a long time, but came to public light around early 2010 when a split within the cartel formed. In the 1990s, a military wing of the Gulf Cartel named Los Zetas was formed by Mexican army deserters who followed a highly trained 21-year-old military operator named Arturo Guzman de Sena. He'd been sent to Tamaulipas by the army to work as a security chief. life in the cartel stronghold of Miguel Alemán, and he was eventually recruited by the Gulf Cartel before ultimately joining them and forming Los Zetas. In 2010, however, things soured, and Los Zetas, now under the leadership of Heriberto Lescano, fractured from the Gulf Cartel, who in turn teamed up with their former rivals to take on their new threat. As a result, much of Mexico's border regions became bloodbaths, transforming Matamoros, Reynosa, and Nuevo Laredo into sites of mass murders, disappearances, extreme shows of brutality, and satanic dismemberments. A nice, sunny March 2nd, 2023 morning in Brownsville, Texas would serve as the prelude to one of the most shocking, multi-day-long kidnappings of Americans in US-Mexico history. It was the day that two innocent civilians in Mexico that day for an afternoon of fun and for a friend's medical procedure would see the Welcome to Matamoros sign, and that would be the last thing they would ever see.
Bien vistos en esta plaza. Por el cartel del Golfo aquí en Matamoros ni en Reynosa. Por favor, si quieren trabajar bien con la línea correcta.
The day began with four friends from South Carolina, Shaheed Woodward, Zendel Brown, Eric Williams, and Latavia Washington McGee, pulling a rented white Chrysler minivan out of a Motel 6 parking lot in Brownsville, headed for the US border crossing at Matamoros, known as the Express International Bridge. They'd all come down from Lake City, a small town sitting an hour and a half inland from Myrtle Beach and holding a population of just over 6,000 residents. The four had grown up together, now in their 30s, and were reportedly always together. Around the time of their 2023 trip, one of the group members, Shaheed Woodward, had recently found employment at the Monterey Bay Suites in Myrtle Beach, and so he'd moved out of Lake City, but he wasn't too far away and was still close to the friend group. They'd planned their trip to Matamoros in advance. It was supposed to be a road trip down to the city where they had an early 7:30 a.m. tummy tuck cosmetic treatment for McGee. Not her first one there, as she'd been there 2 years prior. She'd invited Woodward, her cousin, to join them from Myrtle Beach, as they were very close and were planning on celebrating Woodward's birthday on their trip. Inexpensive cosmetic treatments, including plastic surgery, hair transplants, and butt lifts, are one of the highest sources of US travel into Mexico. About 1 million US citizens per year seeking these treatments in 2023 alone, and as such, it wasn't necessarily a bizarre or a one-off thing for the group to travel down there. The group left South Carolina with a fifth friend, Cheryl Orange, and drove to Brownsville, Texas. There they stopped at a Motel 6 near the border, and left within the day. Orange, however, couldn't enter with them to Mexico due to her not having the proper identification forms to cross the border. The plan was for the four others to drive to a clinic in Matamoros and for them to wait as McGee underwent her tummy tuck procedure. They would then return to the Motel 6 where they would continue their road trip birthday celebration. McGee, Woodward, Brown, and Williams crossed the Express Bridge at around 9:20 a.m., now in Mexico, and began setting out to find the clinic.
What it's like in Mexico.
New video obtained by CNN from inside the vehicle of four Americans just prior to their kidnapping in Mexico.
Hola!
The Americans shown and heard on Facebook Live just after they crossed into Mexico from the United States.
However, Matamoros is a vast city, and within a short period of time, they were lost, late for the appointment by a few hours. By 11 a.m., the group was still lost and had begun driving through a shadier, more rundown part of the city, unknowingly being followed. A gray Volkswagen Jetta had begun following them closely, followed by a series of other cars unknown to the group. The men stalking them were 5 members of the Scorpions, an armed group within the Gulf Cartel who allegedly mistook the Americans as Haitian drug smugglers and began to plan an ambush. The day they'd entered Matamoros, a warning within the city had been issued for parents to keep their children at home instead of school due to shootings around town, while the US Embassy there had alerted their staff to stay within the office and avoid the downtown, where the group had now found themselves unknowingly driving through. At 11:45 a.m., they were ambushed. A white pickup truck struck into them, and gunmen exited the vehicle, spraying the Chrysler with their rifles. McGee got out while the other 3 with her attempted to flee the gunfire, but all got shot. A group of armed men exited the truck, grabbed McGee, and forced her into the back before grabbing the other three and throwing them into the truck. Both Woodward and Brown were completely limp and had a trail of blood dragging behind them, while Williams was still clinging on to life. Someone living in a neighboring building had caught the entire scene unfolding on camera. Some of the gunfire had gone stray and struck a Mexican mother on a street about a block away, killing her as well. The truck then left the area, the 4 Americans still in the bed. Authorities in Mexico began their investigation almost immediately, while the FBI launched their own investigation and began offering $50,000 rewards for information on the 5 kidnappers. Police in Matamoros first found rental documents in the Chrysler, which had been left on the street following the abduction and double homicide, using videos taken of the kidnapping as well as surveillance video from local businesses and traffic cameras. Authorities identified the truck used, a new white GMC, and began tracking it down. Within the day, police were out on the hunt for the truck and had obtained fingerprints and DNA samples of the kidnappers. However, the assailants knew the police were on their trail and began moving their victims from one safe house to another to avoid capture, drawing out the investigation. One of the locations the kidnappers had taken their victims to was a health clinic in Matamoros to treat the 3 who'd been shot so they wouldn't bleed out, but Brown and Woodward were dead upon leaving the clinic.
I've been briefed by the FBI, which is working with Mexican authorities, and senior department officials are working closely with our counterparts at the State Department.
As state police hunted the kidnappers down, McGee and her friends were moved to their final location, a small red shack in a desolate field leading to the coastal tourist attraction of Playa Baghdad, guarded by a 24-year-old member of the Scorpions who felt secure from the police out there. They weren't expecting the amount of force the police were using to find the 4 Americans.
Red plastic mask.
They put masks on?
Yeah, it was putting the guns to our head, telling us not to look up, things like that.
Had you gotten any kind of medical treatment?
The cartel took us to a clinic after we left from the spot where they was questioning us at.
They told us, they was like, I guess after they kept asking us and our questions, our answers never changed. They said, well, we're gonna get y'all some help.
And what kind of treatment did they give you?
They put my leg on a 2x4 and then they stitched it up.
They just stitched it up?
Right.
Did they give you...
No pain medicine or nothing. They just stitched it up.
Kidnappings in Matamoros are a tragic and all too often reality for citizens living in one of Mexico's cartel strongholds, a region all too familiar with drug trafficking, human trafficking, child smuggling, extortion, ransom kidnappings, and the satanic ritual murders that plagued Mexico's cartels. Videos have emerged from Tamaulipas' drug wars over the past few years, showing brutal and slow executions of rival cartel members and kidnapping victims that were used as fear tactics. But these were American citizens, which meant heavy pressure from Washington, D.C. U.S.-Mexico Ambassador Ken Salazar traveled to Mexico to meet with then-President Andrés Manuel López Obrador and put pressure on finding the Americans in as little time as possible.
Information we have is that they crossed the border to buy medicine in Mexico, and there was a confrontation between groups, and they were detained.
Mexico's president has indicated this may be a case of mistaken identity and the group unintentionally was targeted.
The FBI, working very closely with other federal partners and Mexican law enforcement agencies to investigate this.
Calls for sending American soldiers into northern Mexico began increasing, and the Mexican authorities had to act fast.
Here you can see the ambulance bringing the Americans across the border and to a Texas hospital. The Americans crossed in Brownsville, Texas to Matamoros, Mexico, where they came under heavy gunfire and were kidnapped. Video showing the armed men loading the Americans into a pickup truck. Now, UTEP professor of border trade issues Josiah Hyman says while El Pasoans may be more cautious after the kidnapping in Matamoros, he still thinks people will cross for medical purposes, speaking about a 2018 survey.
On the morning of Tuesday, March 7, a collaboration between multiple authorities in Matamoros traveled down to the Matamoros Playa Baghdad road and ventured into a field off the side of the road. They passed through trees and circled in on a small field where the Red Shack sat, holding the cartel's 4 victims. At around 10:15 a.m., the police moved in, arresting the bodyguard outside the door and extracting the kidnapping victims, confirming that Woodward and Brown had passed away. Hundreds of soldiers were sent into Matamoros by the Mexican government that same day to keep the peace in the city and to keep the tourists safe, as they began the process of sending them back to Texas. On Thursday, March 9, the 4 were brought back into America, the 2 murder victims unfortunately traveling in coffins, while the 2 others were quickly placed in a Texas hospital to undergo emergency treatment. That same day, senior leaders in the Scorpion clan issued a statement of apology for the kidnappings, distancing themselves from the incident and stating that it was the work of independent operators who went their own way and broke the Gulf Cartel's rules. They'd managed to catch the 5 kidnappers, tie them up, and drop them off in the area where they had originally kidnapped the 4 Americans, with the note issuing the apology placed around them. Mexican authorities announced their arrests on Friday. A lot of responses were issued following the conclusion of the brutal, multi-day-long kidnapping and double homicide. South Carolina Senator Lindsey Graham promoted the idea that the US label the Mexican cartels as foreign terrorist organizations and to have the US military be involved in the fight against the narco armies controlling 1/3 of Mexico if the Mexican army couldn't do it themselves.
It's time now to get serious and use all the tools in the toolbox, not just in the prosecution lane, not just in the law enforcement lane, but in the military lane as well. We're going to terrorize the terrorist. I can tell you what it's like to be a terrorist when the U.S. military is on your ass. You don't sleep well at night. You know, the terrorists live in caves. They're committed to their cause. The narco-terrorist lives in mansions, out in the open, buying fancy cars. We know where you live, and we know how you make your money. To our Mexican neighbors, yeah, we want a good relationship. You're failing your own citizens, and you're putting America at risk. You need to do more.
On March 11, the day after McGee and Williams were rescued from their imprisonment in the shed, the Texas Department of Public Safety issued a statement warning anyone within the state from going to Mexico during spring break, citing other recent tragedies like the kidnapping of 3 Texas women who'd also gone missing in downtown Matamoros back in late February.
At the beginning of the film, the victim is in white pants at the corner of the store. In all probability, he's a drug dealer. He may have come out of the red pickup truck. The snatch team does appear to have some semblance of discipline and order and was able to effectively grab the target without significant trouble. Regardless, after the video stops rolling, the outcome for the victim was not good.
To this day, Tamaulipas has around 13,000 ongoing missing persons reports, while Mexico as a country has over 112,000 disappearances that have yet to be solved. The kidnapping and murder of the 4-person friend group from South Carolina was just one episode in a wave of cartel violence along the US-Texas border that has transformed the serene southern region of the state into an American battlefield where authorities are fighting to contain the allure of cartel money and the tragedies that follow it.